Yes, the International Monetary Fund has warned its government. And what is the warning? Be careful of your debt. It's a timely warning for President Mohammad Muizzu.
5 years back, Sri Lanka was in similar situation to what Maldives is facing right now.
The International Monetary Fund has cautioned Sri Lanka to be vigilant in monitoring inflation and accelerate delayed structural reforms in public financial management and loss-making state-owned enterprises.
A comparable economy, the same ocean, and the same neighbors, and the same friendship with China.
So Sri Lanka, of course, well documented. The crisis in Sri Lanka, it's left over 22 million people in dire straits.
This was the time when Sri Lanka made some drastic changes in their economy and started to heavily dependent on debt from China. When China offered lucrative loan to Sri Lanka without considering the consequences and lacking thorough understanding and planning.
While Sri Lanka was never good with money, it was China that ensured Colombo goes bankrupt.
They borrowed despite the clear guideline from the IMF. This served as a lesson for countries with smaller economy and single source of income. They must be very cautious with such a loan because any global volatility can damage the country's single source of income and eventually lead the country into massive debt trap and economic recession.
By 2019, Sri Lanka's tourism sector was already suffering. The Easter bombings had scared off Europeans who would holiday in the island nation. Then came the Wuhan virus. When borders closed, tourists completely stopped arriving.
Many economists have stated that the downfall of Sri Lanka began when they made drastic change in their economic policies, such as heavily reliance on foreign loans for countries and infrastructure development, road, bridge, and electricity. Second is mismanagement and malfunctioning in state administration and the failure of the law and order system. Third is natural and man-made disaster like the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Fourth is heavy exemption from taxes during the Sri Lankan election to gain government position by political parties.
2019 was also the year Gotabaya Rajapaksa was campaigning for presidential elections. Among his election promises were deep tax cuts. Basically, you vote me to power and I will ensure that you pay less tax.
Fifth is sudden shift in agriculture policies like organic farming and complete adaptation and banning of chemical fertilizer countrywide, which eventually lead to decreased production, low farming income, and more dependency on foreign countries for domestic foods. Mixing all these things factored together become a tasty recipe for the country's biggest economic disaster, leading to an economic recession and a debt trap from China. Interestingly, this happened despite clear-cut guidelines from the IMF.
An IMF mission led by Jayabudi, who was in the island since mid-February 2017 to discuss the progress of economic reforms program, has commended government efforts to increase revenue collection and automating revenue administration.
The IMF and World Bank, a type of agencies, suggest and monitor countries' economic policies from time to time and recommended appropriate guidelines for their respective economies. Here are some guidelines the IMF gave to Sri Lanka before its economic recession began. The first is Sri Lanka should reduce its budget deficit, meaning they were spending more money than they were earning. Then second is increase taxes and generate extra source of income. Third is reduce non-essential funding and unnecessary development in the country. Then fourth is minimize the debt from China, which was obviously one of the reasons for Sri Lankan downfall. Taking loan and increase freebies for their citizens to gain government position for their political parties.
Basically, you vote me to power and I will ensure that you pay less tax.
This present as a case study for Maldives. They still have the time to protect themselves from any upcoming recession. However, they seem to be following a completely different path right now. Damaging relation with India, which was part of Maldives' single source of economy, and that is tourism, and increase the country's unnecessary projects like bridge and roads, in order to make tourist destination more attractive and increase freebies for their local peoples. They have even accepted more and more debt from China, which whole combination look like a tasty dish for a huge recession, which the IMF has already signed to Maldives. Hopefully, the future will be good and prosperous for Maldives if they change their policies.